Hello, thank you for listening to this BizGs podcast. My name is Izzy Proctor. I'm a third year at Oxford University studying classics and English, and I applied to the BizGs micro internship in journalism because I thought it would be really interesting to do further research into topics that I'm interested in that aren't part of my degree. And I really enjoyed the experience and the opportunity to do some reading that's not part of my degree, and to improve my knowledge of world events. So the post-conflict region that I chose was post-conflict Iran. So I'm focusing on Iran post the revolution in 1979, when the Shah was exiled and the Ayatollah and theocracy was brought into Iran. I was interested in this primarily because Mahsa Amini's death has been in the news in the last years, and I feel as though I don't know enough about it and the context surrounding the symbolism of the veil in Iran to Islam, and specifically for women in Iran. A few years ago, I read a book called Not Without My Daughter by Betty Mahmoudi, which is a true story about an American woman who married an Iranian man, and they went to Iran to see his family, and her husband decided that he wanted to stay in Iran, and the law in Iran is that a woman and children can't leave the country without the consent of a male relative, a husband or a father. And so Betty Mahmoudi and her daughter were trapped in Iran and wanted to return to the US. This was in 1984, I believe. So this was while Iran was a theocracy, and the US there was a lot of anti-Iranian sentiment in the US at the time because of the Iran-Iraq war. And so it's a really interesting story about an American woman's perspective, and eventually she and her daughter managed to escape after several years in Iran. But I felt as though I knew about a story and someone's perspective, but I didn't really understand the politics and the religion and other people's stories. So I wanted to do some research into the meaning of veiling for Iranian women. And through my research, I've basically just been really fascinated by the cycle of symbolism of veiling in Iran, and how initially wearing a veil, a head covering, was a symbol of being an upper-class woman in the Persian Empire, or being royal. And then how once veiling was incorporated into Islam as a practice, it became a signal of modesty and piety. And then under the Shahs, under Reza Shah Pahlavi particularly, the veil was seen as something that was a barrier to modernity. And I thought it was quite interesting, the article that I was reading about Reza Shah's enforced unveiling used the word barrier to modernity, when some of the translations of hijab from the Quran actually are barrier or curtain. So I thought that was a really interesting manipulation or use of that word by Reza Shah, and the evolution of the symbolism of the veil. And then during the revolution, there were parades of women who were voluntarily wearing the veil and demonstrating their belief and their religion. And it's so interesting to me that the veil was a symbol of revolution at the time, and of people deciding for themselves what they wanted and overthrowing the Shah. And then how under the Ayatollahs, it's become a weapon, essentially, of control of what the West thinks of, or the global North thinks of, Iran and Islam, and also of how the veil's been turned against women, basically, and they don't have the autonomy to choose whether they're wearing hijab anymore. And I just thought it was really interesting from the perspective of someone who's not Muslim and not Iranian to read these accounts of women who are living in Iran at the moment, particularly immediately post-revolution. It was really interesting to read about Oli Mohammadi's discussions with these two women, Mitra and Mariam, and how, with their limited agency, their perception of wearing the veil is so different from what the Western media projects. So Mariam was essentially saying that she wears the veil because it stops the morality police from having the power to scare her, from having any reason to stop her on the street, and be able to reinforce that culture of fear. And Mitra was talking about how women wearing more colourful veils or patterned veils, she doesn't see that necessarily as a sign of increased freedom. She thinks that by wearing the veil and like the dark hador, that she is undermining the government because she sees that they are trying to divert people's attention towards issues such as veiling, and divert their attention away from the wider policies of the regime. And so she sees wearing the most conservative version of the veil as an act of defiance. And I just thought they were really, really interesting, nuanced viewpoints, and kind of like reframed the conversation in my mind about hijab and its symbolism in Islam and Iran and around the world. These accounts reframed that conversation in my mind to be more about how it's being used as a symbol, and how Iranian women's autonomy is being taken away from them by the exploitation of that symbol. And I just thought a lot of the reading I did was really powerful, and I found the experience to be really informative, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to do this research and to write this article.